thing I'd like to talk to you today is we've been doing this thing where we, initially we were learning Vipassana and we were getting, sort of remember the metaphor of the pond. We're getting to get the pond to be still, the stilling of the surface. And then we brought in inquiring mindfulness, going deeper. Now we want to take that quite deep. This practice is the Deepening Vipassana. And it has a very important function. Now you've already, like everything else, you've already been training this implicitly, especially more recently, but now we're going to make it explicit and focal. So the idea here is we want to take the kind of insight that Vipassana affords, but we want to take it into the level of metta. And what we're doing today is actually preparation for the practice I'm going to teach you next week, which is the prajna practice. But we want to take that mindfulness, that Vipassana, very, very deep. We want to like breaking frame in a really, really deep and profound way. And remember what we want. We want eventually to be able to integrate Vipassana at the level of metta. We want, that insight not to just be a cognitive or intellectual insight, but one going, an existential insight, one going into the depths of that process of identification, a process by which we're assuming and assigning identities. We also want to bring a space into that. We want to open it up. So until now, we've sort of been getting deeper, but we want to really open up a space in which we're not only free from automatic and unconscious and reactive ways in which we're framing that process of identity formation and operation. We also want to be free to. We want to be free to grow, develop, change, transform. Freedom from, which is which we've already been really deepening. And now we're going to deepen that more, but also start to integrate it with freedom to. What does that mean? Well, think about how I've mentioned, especially if you've been meditating on your distractions, especially the distraction of thinking. There can come a moment where the distraction goes away. There is no sentences, no inner speech, there's no inner pictures, there's just a space. And what's happening in that space is you are disidentifying with that inner speaking voice. And think about how much we identify with that inner voice in our head, that inner speaking voice. And of course, that has afforded us lots of things. We've talked about how you need to do that when you're coaching, when you're directing. Like everything else, this has a tremendous function. But like every function, it can be overused and abused and malfunction. And what happens is if we are too tightly and automatically and mindlessly identified with our speaking voice, that puts a lot of constraints on the process of identity formation and operation. Remember, we're talking not just about the identities you're assuming for yourself, because they are correlated and co-determined by the identities you're assigning to everything else. So to the degree to which you are over-identified with your speaking mind is the degree to which your identity and the way in which the world can disclose itself to you are locked down. And of course, we're trying to open that up in metta. But now we're deepening Vipassana so we can take it more deeply into a deeper integration with metta itself. So how do we do this? It sounds all very abstract. Right? Well, one thing is you're already doing it, which is whenever you're meditating on a distraction and it falls silent, and there is, for a moment, no speech, no scenery, right? Try to, as I said, try to create a felt memory for that. What does that feel like? What does that feel like? And I know you'll say, but I have to talk to myself, and try not to count the initial self-coaching as part, right, of what you're paying attention to. Eventually, you'll just be able to directly note, oh, you won't have to say to yourself, just like you don't have to say to yourself, I need to turn on the tap when you're washing your hands. You just notice that you need to turn on the tap. You'll get to the point where you just notice without having to speak to yourself, oh, this is what it's like when my mind is empty of inner speech and inner scenery. So that's one thing. I've already mentioned this to you. And now you want to make that, something that you really try to remember to do on a regular basis with dealing with your distractions. But now we're also going to learn a new focus for Vipassana that is designed to do that disidentification that breaks up the automaticity, the unconscious reactive nature of the process of co-identification, and also frees up a space for a new way of being, a new way of seeing, a new way of realizing. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're gonna of course find a core 4, and then you're going to do what I'll from now on be calling basic Vipassana. Now, I don't mean Vipassana without the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. I mean the Vipassana that I've taught you up to now. You're going to follow your breath. When there's a distraction, you note it. You apply the 5 factors. If you get the silence, try to notice that especially, and then you return, as I've taught you, to your breath. Okay? So it's going to be a while. We find the core 4. We do basic Vipassana, following the breath, right? Noting the distractions with an ing word, applying inquiring mindfulness. You'll see why you need to keep inquiring mindfulness quite engaged. Okay, so you do this for a while, and I'll try and flag when you should switch, just to give you a basic idea. Once you've been doing that for a while, you're going to do something, and initially it sounds counterintuitive, but please stick with me. Okay, so now you're sort of in the zone of meditating. It's great. And now stop putting in so much effort. Don't, right? Let distractions come up, and don't label them. Don't apply the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. Oh, heresy, just hang on. Okay, so it comes up, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an interesting practice, and I'll give you a metaphor, and it's based on a metaphor that we already use. Think about a train of thought. And the idea is a train of thought, right? One thing is pulling on the other, and they're all, right, all moving together because they're linked, like it's the causal effect train, right? So imagine now a literal train, and if you're standing very close to it, it fills up your vision, and it seems solid to you. Right? But if you can step back and look at a deeper version of this, right, you can actually notice the space between the cars. And then you can do that thing with your attention where instead of foregrounding the cars, you foreground the space between the cars, and you start to see beyond the empty space. You see beyond the train to the empty space that's on the other side of it. So what we do is we're sitting, we do the basic Vipassana for a while, and then we just let, right, the distractions, the thoughts come up. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to count our thoughts. And we're going to count our thoughts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The number is meaningless. The point about counting your thoughts is it does that thing where you step back, and by counting, you step back and you start to look for the spaces between your thoughts. And they'll be small. But you've had some familiarity of that already from working with distractions and inquiring mindfulness. You look at the spaces, and then try more and more to notice the spaces. Typically what happens is they start to get bigger, and the train of thought starts to slow down. And then see if you can do the following. See if you can then do Vipassana, where the focus isn't on your breath, the focus is on that empty space between your thoughts. And then the distractions are out here again. That's the empty space between your thoughts. And then what do? You apply the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness to that empty space. You meditate into it. You meditatively quest into it. In the tradition, this is described as you're like a cat sitting outside of a mouse hole, waiting for a mouse. What does that mean? So I meditate into that space, and what I'm trying to see when I'm in that space is I'm trying to get an inkling. I'm trying to get a sense of sort of a movement, a bubbling, an energy that, right, as if a thought is going to form. And see if you can pull back, disidentify with that bubbling. It's over there, so that it doesn't actually germinate into a thought. It bubbles here, and it's bubbling. And so you're meditating into that space, and you're always sort of sensing these proto-thoughts, these first first seeds, there's so many metaphors, for thinking. And you try to stay disidentified from them, and you try to look at them just as shifting patterns, if you'll allow me this metaphor, of energy. And then that's what you're meditating on. And what tends to happen is you get that empty space between your thoughts opens up very, very broadly, and you keep meditating into it. The 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. Now, you say to me, but how do I, like, if I was counting my thoughts, what do I do with the distractions? It's the same rule. If you can get to the place where the space between your thoughts is now, center stage and holding the mic, then that becomes your Vipassana focus. You stop counting your thoughts and you focus on the space. You say, well, I might still have distractions, but if the distractions are out here, that doesn't matter. Just like when you're following your breath, you zero in on the space. Now you say, but what if I get fully distracted? Right. If you get fully distracted from the space, if you give in to the thought in that sense, then what you do is you step back, notice the thought, label it with an ing word, apply the 5 factors, see if the distraction falls silent, and then try to note that. Then what you do is you come back to basic Vipassana, follow your breath for a bit, restabilize, then let your mind just be open. Thoughts come up, count your thoughts until you realize the space between your thoughts, and then meditate into that space so that you come to a place where you feel an expansiveness of mind that is not identified with speaking or making scenes. So a couple of things. This is a challenging practice. Remember, we always have to keep the demands ahead of our growing skills, and so be patient with yourself. For some people, this falling silent of their inner speaker, inner painter, or whatever it is that makes the scenery, can be challenging, precisely because they are very identified with this inner speaking mind. And so if what comes up is something, being uncomfortable is normal, and just keep meditating. Maybe anxiety or something, if it takes you away, or if it's just in the background percolating uncomfortableness, just stay with it. I promise you that with time it will change its valence from something negative to something positive for you, but it takes time. However, if when you get that disidentification and you're into that silent mind, if you're experiencing something that feels like it might mount to terror, stop. Go back, do basic Vipassana for a while. Leave this practice for a few weeks. Try it again gently. Like always, gentle, probative erosion until we can gradually make our way into this place. Now, just to give you a bit of foreshadowing, what happens is, initially you'll get the space between your thoughts, and it's free of thought and it's free of scenery, but it's bubbling still. There's all this sense of sort of energy, and a thought might form here and a thought might form there. And that'll be the case whenever you start this practice, and it'll probably be all that you'll get in this practice for a very long time. But what can happen down the road is not only does it go silent, it drops still. Okay? Don't try to silence your mind or make it still. Remember, we put that project away a long time ago. But what can happen is you meditate into the space, you get the silence, and then the stillness. Okay? Sorry, I'm just having a Meniere's attack. Just be with me in a sec. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm back. So, you can follow silent and then still. And then what you'll see is that's going to be one pole that we're going to need to have cultivated when we practice and learn prajna next week. Prajna is dynamic wisdom. It's active, self-liberating intelligence. Okay, everyone. So I'll remind you again of everything we're going to do, and I'll try to make an indication of where to sort of shift gears. So find your core four, basic Vipassana, noting and labeling the distractions with an ing word, 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness, trying to be especially sensitive and aware if the distraction goes away and there's that silence. What does that taste like? What does that feel like? Then you bring your attention back to the breath, as I've taught you. And then I'll, at some point, after we've done that for a bit, I'll say, okay, now open. Just open your mind. You're going to reduce that effort you're putting in to track your breath. Just opening your mind. Thoughts come up. Start counting them. 1, 2. And don't worry, was that 1 thought or 2 thought? Precision doesn't matter here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And try to notice what the counting it does is try to make apparent to you the space between your thoughts. Try to notice it more and more. See if you can foreground the space between your thoughts until that becomes focal. And the thoughts are now out here, and then you meditate into that silent space, the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. If you're distracted, okay, if you're distracted, ing noting, 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness, note if it falls silent, return and do basic Vipassana again, and then after you're back in the zone, open the mind, allow the thoughts to come up, count the thoughts, etc. Okay? So, there we go. We've been talking about taking the Vipassana very, very deep, Vipassana insight down to the existential level, the level of identification. And what we did for that is a practice called Deepening Vipassana, in which we are learning to shift our focus. So what we do is we do the basic Vipassana, we're following our breath, everything's the same, and then we sort of we reduce the effort, let our mind go. The distractions come up, the thoughts come up, and then we count our thoughts. We count our thoughts, and the number is irrelevant. We're counting our thoughts because we're trying to see the space between our thoughts. And then we try to foreground that space and background the thoughts, and then we meditate into that space with the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness. And this helps us to disidentify from our speaking mind. It helps us realize a more open space of consciousness and thereby radically increase the flexibility, the adaptivity our consciousness and cognition can bring to bear on situations. When you're distracted while you're meditating into that space, like a cat outside of a mouse hole, label the distractions with an ing word, do the 5 factors of inquiring mindfulness, note if the distraction goes away, what that feels like, that empty mind, and then return to the breath. Do basic Vipassana following your breath, and then return. You'll get to a place where that space between your thoughts becomes your meditative focus, and that what you're trying to do there is you're trying to sense a thought emerging, but not really go into it, and it might not even fully verbalize. It may just sort of bubble a bit and then drift away. It may strike you sort of more abstractly and then drift away, and that's what you're going to meditate on. You're going to meditate on that space that is other than your speaking and scenic mind. Okay, everyone? So that's the basic practice. You should always try now, after you've been meditating for a while, like when you're doing Vipassana, not when you're doing metta. After you've been meditating in basic Vipassana for a while, following your breath, then shifting, when it seems appropriate to you, into that practice where you can shift the focus onto that active space between your spoken thoughts. Okay, so everybody, please set your phones to do not disturb. Oh, if I can ask everybody to like this whole video stream, that would be very helpful because it will raise its visibility on the YouTube algorithm, and that will help me to promote this practice for people that I think would be beneficial for.